The rain had started softly that evening, a steady rhythm against the windows of the quiet house. Emily Carter sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, trying to read but losing focus after every few lines. The words blurred together, her thoughts wandering to her husband, James, who had been away for almost 2 weeks on a business trip in Seattle. The house felt too large without him, every sound echoing louder than it should. She had grown used to the silence. But tonight it pressed heavier on her chest. Then came a knock at the door, 3 quick taps that broke the stillness. For a moment she froze, wondering who it could be. It was nearly 8, and she wasn't expecting anyone. She stood up, smoothing her sweater and walking to the door. When she opened it, a rush of cold air swept in, along with the smell of rain. And there he was, Daniel Miller, James's old college friend. He stood on her porch, soaked from head to toe, his dark hair plastered against his forehead. He held a paper bag in one hand and gave her a half smile that carried both warmth and apology. "Hey, Emily," he said, his voice low but familiar. "I was driving through town. Thought I'd stop by and see if you needed anything." "Didn't mean to show up unannounced?" Emily blinked in surprise. It had been months since she'd seen Daniel. He lived a few hours away, and though he and James kept in touch, she hadn't expected him here, not on a rainy Thursday night. "Oh, Daniel," she said, stepping aside. "Come in, please." "You're drenched." He hesitated, then gave a grateful nod and stepped inside. The warmth of the living room seemed to wrap around them both. Emily hurried to grab a towel from the hallway. "You're going to catch a cold," she said as she handed it to him. He laughed lightly, rubbing the back of his neck. "I think I already did halfway here. I didn't realize how bad the storm was until I was stuck in it." She smiled. "You could have called." He shrugged. "I figured it'd be nicer to surprise you. James told me he was out of town. I just wanted to check in, make sure you're not too lonely." Emily's heart tugged at that word. Lonely. She wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the truth sat quietly in her eyes. "I'm fine," she said, "just missing him a bit." They moved to the living room, and Daniel placed the paper bag on the coffee table. "Brought dinner," he said. "I stopped by that little Italian place you two love. Got pasta and salad. Hope that's still your favorite." And somehow that small thoughtfulness hit her harder than she expected. She smiled, genuine this time. "You remembered." They sat down, unpacking the food together. The scent of warm garlic bread filled the room. Outside, the rain grew heavier, drumming steadily on the roof. For a few moments, neither of them spoke. They ate quietly, the sound of rain filling the spaces where words didn't need to go. Daniel was easy to be around, just as he'd always been. He had a calmness that balanced Emily's quiet restlessness. Over dinner, they talked about simple things, his work as a designer, her art classes, the small things James had told him over the phone. He told her about his new apartment near the lake, how he'd started running again, how he'd learned to cook after years of living on takeout. Emily listened, laughing softly at his stories. It felt natural, almost too natural, to have him there. There was a time years ago when the three of them had been inseparable. Back then, Daniel was around often, sharing dinners and laughter with her and James. But after the wedding, life moved forward and the visits became fewer. Seeing him now, sitting in her living room again, felt like stepping back into an old photograph, familiar yet distant. When the thunder rolled outside, Daniel glanced at the window. "That storm's getting serious," he said. "I might have picked the wrong night to drive through town." Emily followed his gaze to the rain pouring down. "You might have to wait it out," she said. "It doesn't look like it's stopping anytime soon." He leaned back, nodding. "I don't mind. It's been a while since I had company like this." The fire crackled softly in the fireplace, the orange glow reflecting on his face. Emily caught herself studying him. The small lines at the corners of his eyes, the gentle way he smiled when he spoke. He looked older, more grounded, yet there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Maybe it was just kindness. Or maybe it was understanding the kind that only comes from people who've carried their own share of silence. She tried to shake off the thought and smiled again. "James will be glad you stopped by. He always says he misses hanging out with you. Daniel's eyes softened. Yeah, we've both been too busy. Life keeps getting louder, doesn't it? It does, she agreed quietly. For a few seconds, neither spoke. The rain filled the pause between them, steady and calm. Emily stood up to refill their tea, but when she turned, she noticed Daniel watching her. Not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a quiet sincerity that caught her off guard. He smiled faintly, as if to say he was simply glad to see a friend again. Still, her heart stirred with something she couldn't name. Not love, not attraction, but the strange warmth that comes from being seen, really seen. When you've spent days feeling invisible, she handed him the tea. You always liked this brand, she said. He chuckled. You have a better memory than I do. As they sat back down, a flash of lightning brightened the room, followed by a deep roll of thunder. Emily jumped slightly, and Daniel smiled. Still not a fan of storms. Not when I'm alone, she admitted. Well, he said, his tone gentle, you're not alone tonight. The words lingered. Simple, kind, but somehow heavier than they should have been. She nodded, avoiding his gaze, pretending to sip her tea, though her hands felt unsteady. An hour later, the storm still hadn't eased. The clock ticked past 9, and Daniel looked at his phone. I should probably get going soon, he said, though he didn't move right away. Emily glanced outside at the flooded street. You can't drive in that. It's dangerous. You can stay here in the guest room. He hesitated, clearly torn. Are you sure? She nodded. Of course. It's what James would want me to say. That made him smile, though there was something thoughtful in his eyes. Then I'll take you up on it, he said softly. She led him down the hall, showing him the guest room. As she turned to leave, Daniel said, Thanks, Emily, for the dinner, the company, and for not making me feel like a stranger. You never were, she replied, smiling faintly. Good night, Daniel. Good night, Emily. As she walked back down the hall, she could still hear the rain, steady and endless. She paused at her own door, glancing toward the guest room once more. The night felt different now. Not wrong, not right. Just full of quiet emotion she couldn't quite name. She turned off the light, closed her eyes, and let the sound of the rain fill the space between what was, what could be, and what she knew she should hold on to. The morning after Daniel's unexpected visit felt calm, as though the storm had washed the world clean. Emily woke early, surprised at how peaceful the house sounded. The air smelled like rain and wood smoke. She went downstairs quietly, expecting Daniel to still be asleep, but found him already in the kitchen, making coffee. He looked up when she entered, smiling that easy smile that made the room feel lighter. Morning, he said. I hope you don't mind, I've found the coffee beans. Emily shook her head, returning his smile. You remembered where everything is, he chuckled. Some things you don't forget. They sat at the small breakfast table, sipping coffee while the sunlight stretched across the floor. It should have felt awkward having her husband's best friend there, but it didn't. It felt normal, comfortable, maybe too comfortable. After breakfast, Daniel offered to help her bring in the firewood from the porch. The air outside was cool, crisp, and smelled of wet earth. They worked quietly, occasionally laughing when the wood slipped or when the wind caught Emily's hair. By the time they came back inside, the fire was already glowing, throwing warm light across the room. They sat on the rug in front of it, letting the heat chase away the chill. For a while, they talked about simple things. How busy James had been lately. How Emily had started sketching again. Daniel told her about his travels, the cities he'd seen, the people he'd met. He had always been good at telling stories, painting them with just enough emotion to make her feel like she was there. Do you ever miss the old days? He asked suddenly, staring into the fire. Sometimes, Emily said softly. Life was simpler then. You, James, me, we were always together. It feels like a lifetime ago. Daniel nodded. We were each other for hours. Emily laughed. And James insisted he didn't need a map because he had a great sense of direction. Yeah, Daniel said with a grin. And we ended up 3 hours away from the coast. They both laughed until the memory faded into a quiet smile. The laughter felt good. It filled something in her that had been empty for too long. Daniel's eyes lingered on the wedding photo above the mantel. "You two look happy there," he said. Emily followed his gaze. "We were," she whispered. "We still are, I think. It's just different now. He's always traveling, always working. Sometimes I feel like I'm living beside his schedule instead of beside him." Daniel turned to her, his tone gentle. "That sounds lonely." "It is," she admitted. "But I know he's doing it for us, for our future." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "You've always believed in him." "I have to," she said, smiling faintly. "It's what love means." Daniel didn't respond right away. Emily tilted her head. "Different how?" "I don't know," he said with a faint smile. "If James hadn't met you first, if I'd had the courage to tell you back then that He stopped himself, shaking his head. "Never mind. That was a long time ago." Emily's breath caught, her heart skipping. "Daniel," she began, but he waved it off gently. "It doesn't matter," he said. "You and James are perfect together. You always were. Sometimes I think about the past more than I should." She didn't know how to respond. There was no anger in his words, just quiet honesty. It made her chest ache. "I think we all do that," she said finally. "Remember things that could have been, but life chooses for us, doesn't it?" Daniel nodded slowly. "Maybe it does." The fire flickered low. Emily added another log, trying to focus on the flame instead of the tension that filled the air. It wasn't romantic tension, not exactly, but something more fragile. The kind that comes from shared history and unspoken thoughts. When Daniel looked at her again, his expression had softened. "You're still the same, Emily," he said quietly. "Still kind, still strong. I'm glad you're happy." She smiled, though a part of her wasn't sure she was. "Thank you," she said. He stood and slipped on his jacket. "I'll let you get back to your evening. I don't want to overstay my welcome." "You're always welcome," she said sincerely. James would say the same. Daniel nodded, picking up his keys. "Tell him I said hi. I will." As he opened the door, the cool air swept in again, carrying the smell of wet leaves. Emily stood in the doorway, watching as he walked to his car. When the engine started and the headlights disappeared down the road, she stayed there for a long time, staring at the empty driveway. Inside, the fire still burned, soft and steady. She sat back down in front of it, hugging her knees. The warmth on her skin contrasted with the heaviness in her chest. She didn't regret letting him in, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something delicate had shifted, like a door had opened somewhere in her heart. One she hadn't realized was locked until now. She whispered into the quiet, "James, please come home soon." But the only answer was the soft crackle of the fire and the echo of memories she wasn't sure she should have. Revisited. The evening after Daniel's visit had left the house feeling quieter than usual. Emily tried to go back to her normal rhythm, cleaning, cooking, checking emails, but her mind kept replaying the warmth of that afternoon. The sound of laughter by the fire, the honesty in Daniel's eyes. It wasn't something she wanted to hold on to, yet it lingered, like the faint scent of smoke that refused to fade. James had called that morning, his voice rushed as always. "I'll be staying another week," he'd said. "We've got delays here. I'll make it up to you, I promise." She told him it was fine, that she understood. She always did. After the call ended, the silence in the kitchen grew heavy again. She missed him, his steadiness, his presence. But part of her also missed how alive she had felt the day before, just talking to someone who truly listened. That night the sky turned gray, the wind sharp and restless. Emily sat by the window, sketchbook open but untouched. The storm clouds looked almost identical to the night Daniel had knocked on her door. And then, almost like fate, she saw headlights approach. Her heart skipped. A knock followed moments later, soft, uncertain, yet familiar. When she opened the door, there he was again. Daniel stood with his hands in his jacket pockets, his hair tousled by the wind. "Hey," he said quietly. "I was on my way home from a client meeting and thought I'd stop by. I shouldn't have, probably." Emily blinked, surprised but not upset. "It's fine," she said. Come in before you freeze. He hesitated. Are you sure? She nodded. You can stay for a bit. It's cold out. Stepped inside, wiping his shoes on the mat. The air between them felt different this time, cautious, aware. She offered him coffee and they sat at the kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. You didn't have to come, she said finally. I know, Daniel replied. I guess I wanted to make sure you're okay. I'm fine, she said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. Daniel studied her quietly. You don't look fine. You look tired. Maybe lonely. Emily looked down at her mug. Everyone gets lonely sometimes. He nodded, his tone gentle, especially when the person you love isn't around. The words hit deeper than she wanted them to. She didn't answer. Instead, she got up and walked to the living room. Daniel followed a moment later. The fire wasn't lit, so he crouched down and began stacking logs. Mind if I? He asked. Go ahead, she said softly. Soon the fire came alive, casting a golden glow across the room. They sat close, though not touching. The warmth filled the air, but so did something else, that quiet, uncertain tension that neither wanted to name. Daniel broke the silence first. I've been thinking about what I said the other day, about the past. Emily's breath caught slightly. You don't have to explain. I do, he said firmly. I didn't mean to make things complicated. It's just, sometimes being around you brings back memories I didn't realize I missed. She looked into the fire, afraid to meet his gaze. You and James were always so close. Maybe it's just nostalgia. Maybe, he said, but maybe it's more than that. Maybe it's about connection. You've always had this way of making people feel understood. She smiled faintly. That's kind of you to say. It's not kindness, he said softly. It's the truth. Their eyes met not with intensity, but with quiet understanding. It wasn't passion. It was recognition, the kind that happens between two people who share the same silence. The firelight flickered across his face, and she noticed the tiredness around his eyes. The small scar near his temple she'd never seen before. He wasn't perfect, but there was a warmth in him she couldn't ignore. I shouldn't be here, Daniel said after a while. It's late. Stay until the rain stops, Emily replied, her voice calm, though her heart was racing. He hesitated, then nodded. The storm outside grew stronger, wind rattling the windows. Emily brought him a towel and a blanket, the same way she had that first night. Their hands brushed when she passed them to him. It was a brief touch, accidental, yet it sent a quiet shiver through both of them. Daniel looked at her, his expression unreadable. Emily, he said softly, do you ever feel like life gives us moments we're not supposed to have, but we still do? She didn't answer right away. The rain roared outside, thunder rolling in the distance. Maybe those moments teach us something, she said finally. Something we didn't know we needed to learn. He nodded, his gaze still on her. Maybe. The silence stretched. The fire crackled softly, the light catching in her hair. Emily felt her chest tighten, not from guilt but from confusion. There was no wrong intention in the air, just a shared ache neither could fully describe. After a long moment, she stood up. The guest room's ready if you want to rest. He nodded slowly, rising from the couch. Thank you. She walked him down the hallway, stopping at the door. Good night, Daniel, she said quietly. He hesitated, looking at her as if he wanted to say something more. But instead, he just nodded. Good night, Emily. As she turned to leave, the thunder rumbled again, making the lights flicker. She paused, her hand on the wall. For a moment, she thought she heard him move closer, but she didn't turn around. The air was thick with unspoken emotion, heavy but still innocent. She whispered, "Get some rest," and walked back toward her room. Inside her bedroom, she sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the faint glow under the door. The sound of rain softened, blending with the slow rhythm of her breathing. She wanted to stop thinking, to quiet the storm inside her head. But Daniel's words echoed. Moments we're not supposed to have. She lay down but couldn't sleep. Her thoughts kept circling, not about romance or temptation, but about how fragile loyalty can feel when the heart starts craving understanding more than presence. After what felt like hours, she got up and walked to the hallway. She paused outside the guest room. The light under the door was still on. Her hand lifted almost to knock, but she stopped herself. Instead, she whispered through the wood good night. There was silence, then his voice steady and quiet. Good night, Emily. That simple exchange carried more emotion than either expected. She pressed her palm against the door for a moment, then walked away, back to her room, her heart trembling with something she couldn't name. The storm eased near midnight. The house grew still. Emily lay awake, listening to the rain fade into silence. She thought of James, of his tired voice, his distant promises, his empty side of the bed. Then she thought of Daniel, his honesty, his warmth, his quiet understanding. And for the first time, she realized that loneliness could exist even inside love. When she finally drifted to sleep, it wasn't peace she felt, but awareness that some moments, even when they pass without touch or word, leave marks deeper than any visible scar. And in that quiet, half-lit space between loyalty and longing, Emily understood that her heart had crossed an invisible line, not in action, but in feeling, a line she could never fully erase, even when the morning came. You said the storm had passed by dawn, leaving the world washed and quiet. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, falling in soft stripes across the living room floor. Emily woke early, though she hadn't slept much. Her thoughts had drifted all night, through memories, through guilt, through something that wasn't quite regret, but wasn't peace either. The house smelled faintly of coffee and rain. When she came downstairs, she found Daniel already awake, sitting by the window, watching the golden mist rise over the yard. He looked up when she entered, his expression gentle but unreadable. "Morning," he said. "Morning," she replied, trying to sound calm. She tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, suddenly aware of how quiet everything felt. "I made coffee," he said, motioning to the pot. "Didn't want to wake you. Thank you." She poured a cup and sat across from him. The warmth of the mug steadied her hands. For a moment, neither spoke. The air between them was different, softer but heavier. Not awkward, just filled with unspoken truths they both understood but didn't dare to say. Daniel finally broke the silence. "I should leave before traffic gets bad." Emily nodded. "You don't have to rush." I think I do," he said quietly. "It's better that way." She looked down at her coffee, unsure how to respond. He wasn't wrong. The more they stayed in that quiet space together, the more fragile her heart felt. "I understand," she said. "Thank you for checking in on me. For everything." Daniel smiled faintly. "You don't have to thank me, Emily. I just wanted to make sure you were okay." "I am," she said, though her voice sounded uncertain. He leaned back slightly, his eyes gentle. "You deserve to be happy, you know. James is a lucky man." Her heart tightened. "Sometimes I forget that," she admitted softly. "Not because I don't love him, but because I get caught up in missing him." Daniel nodded slowly. "Distance does that. Makes you question things that shouldn't be questioned." They sat in silence for another moment, the morning light wrapping around them like a fragile peace. It was strange how familiar he felt, not like a visitor anymore, but like someone who had quietly slipped back into the rhythm of her life. Finally, Daniel stood, setting his mug in the sink. "I should hit the road." Emily followed him to the door. The driveway was still wet, glistening from the night's rain. "Be safe," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I will." He paused, his hand on the doorknob, then turned to look at her. "Emily, I meant what I said yesterday. You have this way of making people feel seen. Don't lose that, even when life gets busy again." She met his eyes and nodded. "I'll try not to." He smiled, that same quiet, steady smile that had always felt safe. For a second, they just stood there, two people bound not by love, but by understanding. Then Daniel opened the door, the cool morning air sweeping in. "Goodbye, Emily," he said softly. "Goodbye, Daniel." He hesitated as if wanting to say more, then simply nodded and walked out. His footsteps on the porch faded quickly, followed by the hum of his car starting. She stood there, watching through the window as he drove away, the road stretching ahead of him like a clean slate. When his car disappeared around the bend, Emily exhaled slowly, realizing she'd been holding her breath. The silence that followed felt different now, not empty, just still. She turned back toward the house, her eyes falling on the mug he'd left behind. It sat by the sink, a small trace of presence already fading. Like the warmth of his voice in the air, later that afternoon, James called. His voice was cheerful, relieved. "Good news," he said. "I wrapped up early. My flight's tomorrow morning. I'll be home by lunch." Emily smiled, though her throat felt tight. "That's wonderful. I can't wait. I've missed you," he said. "I've missed you too." When the call ended, Emily set the phone down and stood still for a long moment. The words "I've missed you" echoed in her mind, but they felt different now, heavier, more meaningful. She looked around the house at the photo on the mantel, the empty teacup, the soft light that now filled the living room. Everything looked the same, yet she felt changed inside. That evening, she tidied the house. She washed Daniel's cup, folded the blanket from the couch, and opened the windows to let in the fresh air. The smell of rain was gone, replaced by the scent of autumn leaves. When she passed by the mirror in the hallway, she caught her own reflection, and for the first time in a while she really looked at herself. There was no guilt, only quiet reflection. She had not crossed a line of betrayal, but she had come close to something deeper, a truth about her own heart. She realized what had drawn her toward Daniel wasn't romance, but recognition. He had seen the part of her that had been fading, the part that longed for conversation, laughter, and understanding. But now, standing in the calm of the day, she understood something even more important. Love wasn't just about being seen. It was about choosing every day, even in the silence, to keep holding on. When night came, Emily sat by the fireplace again. She lit a small fire, not for warmth, but for peace. The flames reflected in her eyes as she whispered quietly, "James, come home soon." The next day arrived bright and calm. She drove to the airport to meet him. When James appeared through the crowd, suitcase in hand and a tired smile on his face, her heart leaped. She went to him, and when he hugged her, felt like something inside her finally settled. "I missed you," he murmured against her hair. "I know," she said softly. "You're home now." On the drive back, they talked about small things, the trip, the weather, dinner plans. She didn't mention Daniel. Not yet. She wasn't hiding it. She was waiting for the right time to speak with honesty. Because this wasn't about confession or guilt, it was about starting again, fully aware of how fragile love can be when distance grows too wide. That evening, when they sat together by the fire, James reached for her hand. "You okay?" he asked, noticing her silence. "I am," she said with a small smile. "Just thinking about how lucky I am." He squeezed her hand, smiling back. "Well, I'm the lucky one." She leaned her head on his shoulder, closing her eyes. The warmth of the fire, his steady heartbeat, it was enough. For now, it was enough. Later that night, after James fell asleep, Emily stood by the window. The moonlight poured through the glass, illuminating the quiet world outside. She thought of Daniel, of his kindness, his words, and the way he had reminded her that her heart was still capable of feeling deeply. She whispered into the still air, "Thank you," not as a farewell, but as gratitude. Then she turned away from the window and went back to bed, curling into the familiar comfort beside her husband. The storm had passed, both outside and within. She knew that life would move forward, that the days would fill with ordinary moments again. But she also knew she would never forget that week, the rain, the laughter, the reflection it brought. Because sometimes, when love is tested by distance, it's not temptation that teaches us who we are. It's the quiet realization of what we almost lost, and the strength it takes to choose love all over again. As Emily drifted to sleep, the last thought in her mind was simple but true. The heart doesn't forget, but it can forgive, and it can begin again,